Milling Through History presents the Battle of Culloden. The death of Queen Anne created a power vacuum in England, as she died without an heir to the throne. According to the Act of Parliament 1701, George I of Hanover was to take the throne. He was descended from the Stuart family, as his grandmother was the daughter of James I. However, there was some dissent, namely from Scotland and Ireland, which continued to support the claim of James, son of King James II, who was exiled in France at the time. However, the English refused to recognize James as the next monarch due to his Catholic leanings, and therefore was disqualified. It was the son of James, the grandson of James II, Charles Edward Stuart, who would take up the mantle of carrying on the Stuart line. And on July 23, 1745, he would arrive in Scotland. He launched a rebellion on August the 19th at Glenfinnan, and less than a month later triumphantly entered into Edinburgh and was proclaimed king. 3 days later, the Scots would defeat an English army at Prestonpans. And for Charles, he wanted to invade England and dethrone the Hanoverians. His advisors, however, believed consolidating his power in Scotland was far more important. As this particular power play continued to go forward, Charles was able to go ahead and persuade them to go forward with an invasion of England, namely because Charles was of the opinion that the French were going to invade from the south, and that the English, upon seeing the triumphant Stuart line returning to the throne, would rise up and join the Scots in their battle and war against the Hanoverians. Although the promises by Charles were not kept, the fact that the Scots were able to successfully invade England and get their entire army back into Scotland safely was an impressive feat, to say the least. And yet, even though they were able to make a foray into England, this did allow the English to raise an army and send them after the Scots. With food and pay running out, the Scots were forced into a battle where their generals were unable to decide where to fight. The field of Culloden seemed to favor the English far too well, and so an idea came forward that perhaps if the Scots attacked at night, this might give them the necessary tools to gain an advantage and defeat their greater English foe. The night attack failed and exhausted many of the fighters, and the next day the Scots discovered that the English were prepared to march and were coming towards the Scottish army. After a fierce artillery duel, the Scots made an advance towards the English and initiated the famed Highlander charge. Now, in order to go ahead and attempt to combat an army larger than their own, the Scots had extended their lines and thinned out their reserve ranks, effectively making their Highlander charge make a one-and-done battle tactic. If it succeeded, it would be a great victory. If it failed, so too would the Scottish rebellion. The Highlanders engaged the English line, but it was soon blunted, and all offensive moves from the Scots were defeated, and they were forced to break ranks and run. The English, upon seeing their Scottish enemies fall apart, laid chase and were able to effectively wipe out the remnants of Charles Stuart's army. With the rebellion of 45 now being put down, the aftermath of the battle became rather clear, as the Scots lost between 1,500 and 2,500 men, while the English lost at its lowest point 50 and at the most 300 men. After successfully defeating the Scots, though, the English began to work on further integrating the Highland regions of Scotland into Britain. The clergy had to give oaths of allegiance. Hereditary land rights of the Scottish nobles had come to a complete end, and the wearing of the kilt was outlawed for daily use. The only time a Scotsman could ever wear a kilt now was if he was part of the British Army or became a landed man. And yet, ironically enough, the Battle of Culloden also served as a bit of a forebearer. For almost 29 years later to the day, as the field of Culloden became silent, a different green would come alive with the sounds of gunshots, and soon enough, a war for independence. Now be sure to click like, share, and subscribe for future episodes of Milling Through History, and leave comments below for future episode ideas. And be sure to take a look at our suggested reading page.